The piercing wail of sirens shattered the serene dawn, tearing through the crisp mountain air like a jagged knife. My coffee, still steaming in my hand, trembled as 3 patrol cars screeched onto my gravel drive. 7 in the morning. Oh, was this a drug raid? And there she was, Victoria Hayes, the self-proclaimed monarch of Mountain Vista Estates, poised on her meticulously manicured lawn, pointing at me as if I'd committed some unspeakable crime. Officers, seize him. He's unlawfully occupying community space and endangering our children. Oh, if only she knew the bitter irony of her words. The fragrance of pine and the faint scent of my late Uncle Thomas's wood smoke clung to the air, a stark contrast to the venom spewing from her lips. This entitled suburban nightmare had no idea that her opulent mansion, her neighbors' sprawling homes, indeed, the entire 847-acre development, rested on soil that was mine. Mine. She wasn't just harassing an old recluse. She was haranguing her very own landlord. How could a simple, retired electrician like me come to possess such vast Colorado land? And why was this woman about to face the reckoning of her privileged existence? What would you do if a power-mad tyrant tried to banish you from your own property? Tell me, what's your ultimate act of defiance? Where are you watching from? Your tale of neighborhood terror better be good, because mine culminates in eviction notices for my tormentors. My name is Ethan Vance. 15 years prior, I inherited what I believed was merely a rustic cabin from my Uncle Thomas, a wonderfully eccentric soul who'd spent 4 decades off-grid in the Rockies, convinced the government was after his coffee beans. Back then, I was content, pulling wires in commercial buildings in Ohio, dreaming of a quiet retirement by Lake Erie. But fate, cruel and swift, delivered a devastating blow. My beloved wife, Clara, was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer in 2019. For 26 agonizing months, I watched the woman I adored fade, battling not just her illness but the heartless insurance companies, who valued stock prices over her desperate need for pain relief. When she passed in 2021, our empty house became a tomb of vanilla-scented memories and shattered dreams. I couldn't bear it, so I loaded my pickup, drove west, and made Uncle Thomas's sanctuary my permanent home. 12 acres of handcrafted peace, solar panels he'd meticulously installed, and a garden bursting with real food, not just ornamental greenery. The coffee brewed on the wood stove tasted like pure liberty, and the mountain's hushed embrace began to mend the wounds Ohio had inflicted. For a year, my neighbors were genuine, salt-of-the-earth folks, former educators, mechanics, veterans, people who understood that true happiness wasn't measured by a monstrous mortgage. We'd exchange waves, share venison jerky, and live by the unspoken mountain creed: respect privacy above all. Then, like a virulent contagion of arrogance, Mountain Vista Estates descended. By 2022, roaring bulldozers were tearing through ancient pines, carving out space for garish mansions with names like Grand Summit Manor and Whispering Pines Estate. Each cost more than I'd earned in half a decade, boasting massive garages for families who drove to their mailboxes and thirsty lawns that guzzled water like small cities. The new inhabitants arrived in gleaming convoys of imported SUVs, radiating an unbearable air of pharmaceutical sales superiority. Within 6 months, they'd birthed a labyrinth of rules more complex than the tax code and twice as vindictive. No clotheslines. Apparently, air-dried laundry offended their delicate sensibilities. No visible vegetable gardens. Good heavens, what if someone saw actual food growing? And no vehicles over a decade old. God forbid they witness the existence of hard-working people. At the helm of this suburban tyranny was Victoria Hayes, a 45-year-old pharmaceutical executive with hair so blonde it surely cost more than my truck payments. She glided around in a white luxury SUV, its vanity plates proclaiming blessed, a cruel irony, given her incessant complaints about my chimney smoke and the natural hue of my log cabin. Her husband peddled medical devices, and their spoiled children were conveniently warehoused in some exclusive boarding school far away. 3 months after I settled in, Princess Victoria deigned to visit my humble dwelling, clipboard in hand, a smile faker than her hair, and an aura of entitlement that could power a small town. She crunched across my hand-laid gravel in her designer hiking boots. The sound was nails on a chalkboard. She kept scanning the tree line, as if expecting a mountain lion to leap out. "Vance," she began, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "I'm Victoria Hayes, president of the Mountain Vista Homeowners Association. We simply must address your property's detrimental impact on our community's aesthetic." She shoved a thick 47-page legal document at me, her surgically enhanced nose wrinkling at the wood smoke. The pristine mountain air, it seemed, personally offended her city-polluted lungs. "Your solar panels are an absolute eyesore. They violate our architectural guidelines. This cabin requires a professional repaint in pre-approved earth tones. And that vegetable garden is visible from Whispering Pines Drive, a direct violation of residential appearance codes." I leaned against my porch, savoring my coffee. It tasted like sweet defiance, watching her recite regulations as if delivering a death warrant. Uncle Thomas always said city folks fled to the mountains to escape their problems, only to immediately try and recreate the very chaos they'd escaped. "Ma'am," I drawled, letting my Ohio accent stretch like taffy, "I appreciate your concerns, but I was here long before your HOA. Your rules do not and will not apply to me, my cabin or my land." Her saccharine smile shattered like thin ice. "Oh, we'll see about that, Mr. Vance. The law is crystal clear on community standards and property compliance." Crystal clear indeed. As she clicked back to her ridiculous luxury tank, I foolishly believed her clipboard crusade was over. Little did I know, I was about to walk into a 30-year family legacy, a trap Uncle Thomas had meticulously crafted for this very war. 2 weeks later, I realized Victoria wasn't merely entitled. She was weaponizing the entire county government against me. It began with Officer Miller, a nervous building inspector, who pulled into my drive looking as if he'd rather be investigating a gas leak in a dynamite factory. The poor man clutched a clipboard thick enough to stop bullets, while Victoria's luxury SUV lurked at my property line, a suburban predator. "Apologies, Mr. Vance," Miller mumbled, avoiding my gaze. "Numerous complaints about unpermitted structures, septic issues, fire hazards. Gotta check everything." The morning air reeked of pine and bureaucratic meddling as I watched this government puppet dance to Victoria's tune. Miller spent 3 grueling hours crawling through my crawl space, testing my septic system, measuring every beam Uncle Thomas had installed. My uncle's paranoia about government overreach had driven him to build everything beyond code: permits for every nail, inspections for every wire, documentation that would make the IRS weep with envy. "Everything's impeccable," Miller finally admitted, sounding almost disappointed. "Your uncle's construction surpasses most new homes. Solar systems professionally installed, septics practically brand new." Through my kitchen window, I saw Victoria's face flush crimson when she heard the news. But Princess persistence wasn't deterred. Over the next fortnight, she seemingly memorized the county's phone directory, systematically contacting every department with enforcement authority. Fire, health, environmental. Each arrived, found nothing amiss, and departed looking utterly bewildered by their summons. Uncle Thomas's voice echoed in my mind from teenage summers spent here. "Government is like a loaded gun, Ethan. In the right hands it shields people. In the wrong hands it becomes a weapon for those with the most influence." Then came the shocking twist that revealed Victoria's true depths of depravity. A professional surveyor, wielding equipment worth more than my truck, spent 2 days meticulously measuring property lines and marking trees with ominous orange paint, as if planning an invasion. When he knocked on my door, a folder of official documents in hand, the scent of fresh legal paper mingled with the mountain air, creating an unsettling cocktail. "Mr. Vance, I've been hired by Mountain Vista HOA to resolve a boundary dispute.
Our survey indicates your driveway encroaches 18 feet onto HOA common property. The association is prepared to grant you an access easement for $500 monthly, retroactive to January 2022, $18,000. They demanded $18,000 to use a driveway I'd driven on for 15 years. That's preposterous, I exclaimed, my Ohio accent thickening with indignation. My uncle's 1987 survey clearly shows the entire driveway on our land. The surveyor merely shrugged, the apathy of a man simply collecting a paycheck evident in his eyes. Property boundaries can shift, erosion, legal adjustments, updated measurements. The HOA's documentation is current and legally binding. That night, I raided Uncle Thomas's filing system, 3 fireproof safes organized with military precision. The old man's meticulous nature had preserved every document, receipt, and survey from 4 decades of mountain life. When I unearthed his original property survey, my beer went warm in my hand. According to Uncle Thomas's 1987 county-filed notarized to hell documentation, my property line didn't just avoid the HOA common area, it stretched 40 feet beyond what I'd always assumed was my boundary. Victoria's $12,000 rose garden, her cherished pride and joy, sat entirely on my land. I recalled Uncle Thomas's words during one of his paranoid tirades about property rights. Most folks never bother to verify their actual boundaries, Ethan. They just assume the previous owner knew what they owned. But assumptions are the mother of all legal catastrophes. County records can be wrong, new surveys can be bought, but original surveys filed with property deeds, those are pure gold in court. The following morning, I drove to Attorney Silas Thorne's office, a converted Victorian that smelled of aged leather and countless legal victories. Silas had managed Uncle Thomas's estate and had practiced property law in this county since before Victoria was even born. Your uncle faced similar harassment 30 years ago, Silas remarked after reviewing the HOA's survey shenanigans. Different developer, same vile tactics. He developed highly effective strategies for dealing with those who confuse wealth with legal authority. Driving home, I noticed something that warmed my heart more than my morning coffee. Eleanor Jensen, the retired teacher who'd owned her cabin since the 1970s, was observing the unfolding drama from her porch. When our eyes met, she suddenly raised her coffee mug in a silent salute. That evening, a handwritten note appeared under my windshield wiper. Don't let these opulent newcomers ruin our mountains. Some of us remember what this place was like before the luxury SUV invasion. Victoria believed she was intimidating an isolated hermit, utterly devoid of allies or legal acumen. What she failed to grasp was that Uncle Thomas had spent 3 decades meticulously preparing for precisely this brand of corporate bullying, and he'd left me a blueprint for resistance that would make her survey games look like child's play. The scent of pine smoke from my evening fire mingled with the sweet aroma of impending retribution. This, I knew, was merely the overture. Victoria's next move confirmed her utter ruthlessness. It began with a neighborhood safety meeting at the community center, complete with glossy PowerPoint slides and enough manufactured hysteria to ignite a small-town panic. I only learned of it because Eleanor Jensen called me, her voice taut with disgust. Ethan, you simply must know what that woman is saying about you. She's spreading rumors that you're some dangerous recluse, attracting undesirable elements. She claims your transient lifestyle threatens our property values and family safety. 24 hours later, a petition began circulating through the development, demanding the county investigate the hermit with weapon stockpiles who operates an unlicensed compound on Whispering Pines Road. Victoria had managed to amass 47 signatures from neighbors, who'd likely never even spoken to me, but were all too eager to sign anything that might inflate their property values. The stench of paranoia and privilege hung heavy in the mountain air, a toxic brew. But Princess Victoria wasn't finished weaponizing fear. She discovered NeighborLink, that digital cesspool where suburban busybodies congregate to report perceived threats, from unfamiliar joggers to delivery trucks lingering too long. Her posts read like dispatches from a war zone. Ongoing concerns regarding hermit-style individual at end of Whispering Pines Road. Multiple unregistered vehicles. Suspicious amounts of building materials arriving. Recommend increased sheriff patrols for community safety. The woman was painting me as some kind of radical mountain militia leader, not a retired electrician who built birdhouses for solace. Then came the outright sabotage. My internet service mysteriously vanished. The power company received anonymous complaints that my solar setup was backfeeding dangerous voltage into neighborhood lines. The county health department arrived to test my well water, tipped off about potential groundwater contamination from unlicensed septic systems. Every single complaint, I discovered, traced back through Victoria's web of pharmaceutical sales connections and HOA board members. She was wielding her professional relationships like deadly weapons, cashing in favors to persecute a man whose only transgression was refusing to paint his cabin beige. I began installing security cameras around my property, motion-activated trail cams, the kind hunters use to track deer. Within a week, I had enough footage to launch my own reality show about entitled suburbanites behaving badly. Camera 1 captured Victoria's teenage son spray painting Vaki from my mailbox at 2 a.m. His mother's luxury SUV idling nearby, headlights off. Camera 2 recorded HOA board members pacing my property line with measuring tapes, clearly searching for manufactured code violations. Camera 3 captured the ultimate prize, Victoria herself, directing landscaping crews to dump grass clippings directly onto my driveway access, then speeding away when she heard my truck engine start. But the most shocking revelation came when I delved into Victoria's past following a lead from my private investigator cousin in Chicago. It turned out our pharmaceutical princess had a history of neighbor harassment that followed her from New England to Colorado like a foul odor. In Connecticut, she'd sued 3 different neighbors over property disputes, demanding they remove aesthetically inappropriate gardens and even livestock. In Massachusetts, she'd orchestrated a campaign to force an elderly veteran from his home because his truck violated community vehicle standards. She'd fled New England, barely a step ahead of a restraining order filed by a widow whose only offense was hanging laundry on a backyard clothesline. The pattern was chillingly clear. Victoria Hayes was a professional neighborhood terrorist moving from town to town, systematically terrorizing working-class homeowners until they sold their properties to developers at rock-bottom prices. I remembered Uncle Thomas's warnings during one of his conspiracy theory rants. There are 2 kinds of bullies in this world, Ethan. The kind who use their fists and the kind who use the law. The legal bullies are far worse, because they hide behind rules and regulations while utterly destroying people's lives. But they all share one fatal flaw: they expect their victims to fight fair. That evening I made 2 crucial phone calls. The first was to Silas Thorne, asking him to research the legal concept of harassment by neighbor under Colorado law. The second was to the county sheriff, filing formal complaints about false reporting and harassment. But a third discovery changed everything. While organizing Uncle Thomas's paperwork for Silas, I found a manila envelope note. For Ethan, emergency only. Inside, my coffee turned to ice in my hands: property deeds, survey maps, and legal documents. Uncle Thomas hadn't just owned my 12 acres. According to these papers, he'd systematically acquired surrounding properties throughout the 1990s using a web of shell companies and trust funds. The documents revealed a sprawling ownership that extended far beyond my wildest imagination. A handwritten note in Uncle Thomas's distinctive script was clipped to the deed pile. Nephew, if you're reading this, some developer is probably trying to force you out. They tried the same thing with me in 95. I spent 30 years ensuring they'd never succeed. Check the mineral rights sections. You'll understand my paranoia about government surveys. The mountaineer suddenly hinted at something far grander than a mere neighborhood squabble. Uncle Thomas hadn't been preparing for simple harassment. He'd been constructing a legal fortress designed to withstand corporate warfare. And judging by the sheer volume of these documents, Victoria had just declared war on the wrong hermit's nephew. Victoria's desperation reached new heights when her husband's law firm entered the fray. The cease and desist letter arrived via certified mail on a Tuesday morning, thick as a phone book and twice as menacing. Hayes and Associates. Apparently her husband, Robert, practiced corporate law when not hawking medical devices. Demanded I immediately cease interfering with legitimate HOA governance.
and creating hostile conditions that diminish neighborhood property values. The legal jargon was certainly impressive enough to intimidate most people, but I'd spent 40 years dealing with union-busting corporate lawyers who believed big words could scare working folks into submission. This letter was all bite, no bite, a legal temper tantrum disguised as professional corresponding. But Victoria wasn't finished flaunting her privileged connections. 3 days later, the county building inspector reappeared, this time accompanied by a health department official and a fire marshal. They'd received credible reports about potential health code violations, structural instabilities, and fire hazards at my unlicensed residential compound. The morning air reeked of pine and bureaucratic harassment as I watched 3 government employees crawl through Uncle Thomas's immaculate construction, searching for violations that simply didn't exist. My coffee grew cold as they meticulously tested everything, from electrical outlets to insulation, clearly hoping to find something, anything, to justify Victoria's relentless complaints. So we're obligated to investigate all reported safety concerns. The fire marshal explained apologetically, your structure meets or exceeds all town codes, but we had to verify. As their official vehicles vanished down my driveway, I spotted Victoria's luxury SUV parked on the county road, likely monitoring the inspection results through binoculars, like some suburban spy from a bad movie. Then came the incident that proved this woman had completely lost her mind. I was in my workshop, building a cedar birdhouse, enjoying the peaceful rhythm of hand-planing wood, when sirens began to wail up my driveway. 2 sheriff's deputies and an EMT truck pulled up, as if responding to a hostage crisis. Mr. Vance, we received a 911 call reporting a domestic disturbance at this address.
Possible mental health crisis requiring immediate intervention. I set down my woodworking tools and stared at the deputies, both looking as baffled as I felt. Officers, I live alone. I've been building birdhouses all morning. No disturbance, no crisis, no nothing. 20 minutes later, after the EMT crew confirmed I wasn't having a psychological breakdown, Deputy Jones pulled me aside, an expression mixing frustration with genuine concern. Mr. Vance, this is the 4th false emergency call we've received about your property in 6 weeks. Whoever is making these reports is wasting emergency resources and potentially endangering real victims who need help. We're opening an investigation. That afternoon, I filed formal harassment complaints against Victoria with both the Sheriff's Department and the County Attorney's Office. False 911 calls weren't just annoying. They were felony offenses that could lead to serious jail time. But I was also conducting my own investigation. My private investigator cousin in Chicago had unearthed Victoria's full background, and the pattern was uglier than I'd ever imagined. In Connecticut, she'd used identical tactics against 3 different neighbors, fabricated emergency calls, relentless harassment campaigns, manufactured legal disputes. One elderly veteran had actually sold his house and moved to Florida just to escape her relentless persecution. She was a professional destroyer of working-class neighborhoods, leveraging her wealth and connections to drive out anyone who didn't conform to her vision of suburban perfection. Meanwhile, I was spending every spare moment at the county courthouse, immersing myself in Uncle Thomas's property empire. The old man's meticulous paranoia had driven him to document every land purchase, every legal maneuver, every strategic acquisition he'd made over 3 decades. What I uncovered made my hands tremble as I turned page after page of deeds. Uncle Thomas hadn't just bought surrounding properties during the 1990s farm foreclosure crisis. He'd systematically acquired mineral rights, water rights, and easement agreements that wove a legal web spanning hundreds of acres. The shell companies he'd used, Mountain Heritage LLC, Whispering Pines Holdings, Colorado Summit Investments, weren't just for privacy. They were strategic instruments for quietly assembling a vast property empire without anyone grasping its true scale. I remembered his stories about battling developers in the 90s, how they tried to force him out through zoning changes and eminent domain threats. His response hadn't been to retreat. It had been to quietly acquire enough surrounding land to render their development dreams utterly impossible. But the most staggering discovery came in a manila folder marked Nuclear Option, Ethan's Inheritance. Inside were documents revealing that Uncle Thomas had retained mineral rights and subsurface ownership for properties he'd sold to developers, including the very land where Mountain Vista Estates now stood. Every single house in Victoria's precious subdivision was built on land where Uncle Thomas, and now I, owned everything beneath the surface. Crucially, the original developer agreements contained automatic lease termination clauses for harassment of original property owners and bad faith violations of neighborly conduct. The taste of mountain air suddenly held the sweet, intoxicating flavor of legal vengeance. Uncle Thomas hadn't just prepared for harassment, he'd built trapdoors into every property deal, waiting for someone exactly like Victoria to unwittingly trigger them. A handwritten note in Uncle Thomas's distinctive scrawl was clipped to the nuclear option documents. If you're reading this, some entitled developer spawn is probably making your life hell. Time to teach them about real property law. That evening, my hands trembling, I called Silas Thorne. Silas, I think I finally understand what Uncle Thomas was truly planning, and I believe Victoria just activated his doomsday device. The scent of pine smoke from my evening fire mingled with the intoxicating aroma of impending justice. Victoria believed she was fighting a harmless recluse. She was about to discover she'd declared war on the wrong hermit's nephew. The meeting with Silas Thorne utterly transformed my understanding of my inheritance. His law office smelled of leather-bound victories and decades of legal warfare as I entered, clutching Uncle Thomas's nuclear option folder. Silas had practiced property law in this county since before Victoria was born, and his reputation for crushing corporate bullies was legendary among ordinary folks who couldn't afford high-priced attorneys. "Ethan," he said, spreading Uncle Thomas's documents across his mahogany desk like a general planning a battlefield strategy, "your uncle was the most paranoid, brilliant property lawyer I've ever encountered, and I mean that as the highest praise." What Silas revealed made my coffee taste like liquid gold. Uncle Thomas hadn't merely owned my 12-acre cabin. Over 30 years, he'd systematically acquired 847 acres of prime Colorado mountain land, using a labyrinthine network of shell companies, trust funds, and legal entities that would make corporate lawyers weep with envy. Mountain Heritage LLC, Whispering Pines Holdings, Colorado Summit Investments. Each was Uncle Thomas donning a different legal mask. He bought everything during the farm foreclosure crisis of the 1990s, Silas explained, his weathered fingers tracing property boundaries on survey maps that resembled military intelligence charts. Farmers were losing generational land to banks, and your uncle swooped in with cash offers that literally saved families from utter ruin. But here's where Uncle Thomas's genius truly shone. He didn't just buy land. He engineered the sales. When Mountain Vista Estates sought to develop the area in the early 2000s, Uncle Thomas sold them only the surface rights, carefully retaining mineral rights, water rights, and subsurface ownership, all locked into trust funds that transferred to me upon his passing. The developer got permission to build houses, but Uncle Thomas maintained legal control over everything that truly mattered. "Every single house in that subdivision now sits on land you own," Silas declared, his grin spreading like a wildfire. The homeowners believe they purchased property, but they're actually lessees under 99-year ground lease agreements that most of them never even bothered to read. The taste of mountain air suddenly carried the exhilarating hint of absolute power. But Uncle Thomas's crowning achievement was the harassment protection clauses buried deep within the original developer agreements. Any bad faith violations of neighborly conduct or harassment of the original property owners would trigger automatic lease termination rights, empowering the true landowner, me, to reclaim surface rights and force the eviction of hostile residents. Victoria's campaign of persecution isn't just harassment, Silas explained, shuffling through lease violation documentation. It's irrefutable grounds for terminating her ground lease and seizing her house. Every false 911 call, every manufactured complaint, every attempt to intimidate you has been meticulously documented as a breach of contract. I stared at the paperwork that transformed me from a hounded recluse into the landlord of an entire subdivision.
Every monthly HOA fee Victoria collected included rent payments to my inherited trust funds. Every time she threatened me, she was violating lease agreements that could cost her everything. Silas, I whispered, my voice thick with disbelief. Are you telling me Victoria has been paying me rent while simultaneously trying to evict me from my own land? His laughter boomed through the office like thunder rolling through mountain valleys. Son, your uncle spent 30 years setting up the most elaborate property rights trap in Colorado legal history. He predicted this exact scenario, entitled developers moving in, harassing the original landowner, attempting to force out hard-working people who didn't fit their suburban fantasy. The documentation was overwhelming. Mineral rights extending hundreds of feet beneath every McMansion, water rights controlling the wells that supplied the entire subdivision, easement agreements that granted me legal authority over road maintenance, utility access, and even landscaping standards. Uncle Thomas hadn't been a paranoid hermit at all. He'd been a strategic genius who understood that the ultimate defense against corporate bullying was owning the very ground your enemies stood upon.
But the final revelation made my hands tremble as I held the papers. Your uncle left specific instructions, Silas said, producing a sealed envelope marked, for Ethan's war against suburban terrorists. He knew someone like Victoria would eventually move in and try to dismantle what he'd painstakingly built. This envelope contains his recommended strategy for dealing with entitled bullies who mistake wealth for legal authority. Inside was a handwritten battle plan that read like a military operation, precise documentation requirements, strict legal timelines, public revelation strategies, and community protection protocols. Uncle Thomas had anticipated Victoria's every move and meticulously prepared countermeasures that would turn her own tactics against her. The scent of aged leather and legal triumph mingled with the sweet fragrance of generational revenge. Uncle Thomas hadn't merely bequeathed me property. He'd armed me with the tools to shield hard-working folks from corporate predators who wielded money as a weapon against those who genuinely belonged in these mountains. So what's our next move? I asked Silas, my voice now steady with newfound resolve. We follow your uncle's playbook, he replied, his eyes gleaming with predatory satisfaction. And we teach Miss Hayes that some hermits don't just bite back, they devour. The War Council convened in my cabin on a crisp Thursday morning, pine smoke curling from the chimney like an offering to the gods of legal battle. Silas Thorne spread Uncle Thomas's master plan across my hand-built oak table, while Eleanor Jensen poured coffee strong enough to resurrect the dead. Marcus Brown, the local surveyor who'd actually collaborated with Uncle Thomas in the 90s, arrived with GPS equipment and a grin that promised the precise demolition of Victoria's suburban empire. Your uncle was 3 steps ahead of everyone, Marcus declared, unrolling property maps that looked like military battle plans. He hired me to survey every inch of this mountain, including subsurface mineral deposits and water table analysis. The man documented everything, right down to individual tree roots crossing property lines. Sarah Davies, the intrepid investigative journalist from the regional newspaper, spread her own research across the table, damning photos of similar developer fraud cases in Nevada, Arizona, and Texas. Her laptop displayed Google Earth images, comparing our mountain before and after Mountain Vista Estates had ravaged 40 acres of ancient forest for their garish mansions. This isn't just local harassment, Sarah explained, her fingers dancing across newspaper clippings and court documents. Mountain Vista Estates has employed identical tactics in 4 other states, deliberately concealing ground lease arrangements, manipulating HOA formation, and targeting original landowners for forced removal. Your case could expose a nationwide pattern of real estate fraud. The morning air filled with the scent of justice simmering and corporate lawyers sweating. Silas outlined our 3-phase strategy like a general mapping out D-Day. Phase 1: meticulous legal documentation, establishing Ethan's complete ownership and Victoria's blatant lease violations. Phase 2: formal notification to all affected homeowners about their true legal status. Phase 3: a public revelation at the HOA annual meeting, scheduled for exactly 30 days from today. We demand surgical precision, Silas warned, his weathered hands organizing legal documents into attack formations. One misstep, and they'll have grounds for harassment claims against us. But if we adhere strictly to your uncle's playbook, we can shatter their entire suburban fantasy without breaking a single law. Marcus began the technical preparations, conducting a complete resurvey of my 847-acre dominion, using GPS coordinates accurate to within 6 inches. You hast feared. Every boundary marker Uncle Thomas had installed was verified and reinforced with new surveyor stakes that would withstand any legal challenge. The work unveiled a beautiful truth. Victoria's precious rose garden didn't just encroach on my property. It brazenly violated 3 separate easement agreements that granted me automatic removal rights. Your uncle was a genius about water rights, Marcus explained, pointing to underground stream maps that resembled vital blood vessels nourishing the mountain. He owns the aquifer that supplies every well in that subdivision. Technically, he could cut off their water supply tomorrow if he chose to enforce lease violations. I recalled Uncle Thomas's wisdom on water law during one of his paranoid lectures. In the West, water is more precious than gold, Ethan. Control the water, control everything built on top of it. City folks never grasp that until their wells run dry. Sarah Davies was meticulously crafting our media strategy, documenting Mountain Vista Estates' insidious pattern of concealing ground lease arrangements from unsuspecting homebuyers. Her investigation had unearthed at least 12 families who'd purchased homes without ever knowing they were actually renting the land from trust funds I now controlled. This story has national implications, Sarah emphasized, scrolling through similar cases across the Mountain West. Developers are exploiting ground lease fraud to maximize profits while artfully shifting long-term liability onto unsuspecting buyers. Your uncle's ingenious trap could expose this entire shameful scheme. But the most gratifying preparation was the psychological warfare. I began my daily morning walks along my actual property boundaries, diligently installing private property. No trespassing signs every 100 feet, each emblazoned with GPS coordinates confirming my legal ownership. The signs were perfectly legal and utterly infuriating to residents who'd simply assumed they owned the land they were in fact merely renting. Eleanor Jensen, bless her retired teacher's heart, initiated casual conversations with the more reasonable neighbors, those who hadn't blindly joined Victoria's harassment campaign. She gently explained the ground lease situation, not demanding they choose sides but offering crucial information that would shield them from the impending legal maelstrom. Most of these people are decent folks who were duped by developers, Eleanor observed, warming her hands on her coffee mug. They deserve to know the truth before Victoria's sheer idiocy obliterates their property values. Silas was meticulously preparing the legal nuclear option. Lease termination notices for the hostile residents, court documents for immediate filing, and restraining orders against any further harassment. Everything would be poised for deployment the very moment Victoria violated one more clause in her ground lease agreement. Colorado law is unequivocally clear about landlord rights when tenants engage in harassment. Silas explained, arranging eviction paperwork like ammunition for a legal war. Once we establish the landlord-tenant relationship, her relentless persecution campaign becomes irrefutable grounds for immediate lease termination and property seizure. The knowledge I was acquiring felt like unearthing dormant superpowers. Property law wasn't merely tedious paperwork, it was a sophisticated weapon system Uncle Thomas had spent decades perfecting for precisely this battle. The scent of pine smoke from my evening fire mingled with the intoxicating aroma of strategic readiness. In 30 days, Victoria would finally confront the agonizing consequences of harassing her actual landlord. But first we needed to let her dig her own grave just a little deeper. Remember, Silas warned as our war council dispersed into the fading mountain light. She will escalate when she realizes we're unwavering. Document every single detail. Maintain your composure. Let her self-destruct while we prepare for the public revelation that will utterly annihilate her reign of suburban terror. The taste of mountain air carried the promise of a justice 30 years in the making. Victoria's desperation reached truly toxic levels when she grasped that I wouldn't back down. The HOA board meeting that Thursday night was her magnum opus of manufactured crisis. I only learned of it because Eleanor Jensen attended, bravely standing as the sole voice of reason amidst 73 residents whipped into a frenzy of pharmaceutical-grade fear-mongering. Emergency special assessment required for rural fire protection upgrades. Victoria shrieked from her makeshift podium, wielding a laser pointer like a weapon of mass suburbanization. The presence of non-compliant structures creates an elevated fire risk, demanding immediate mitigation. Translation: she wanted every homeowner to cough up $12,000 for fire equipment we didn't need, specifically to bankroll a legal war against me. But her true target was my bank account. The special assessment included a clause demanding immediate payment from all property stakeholders within HOA boundaries, meaning she was trying to extort $12,000 from me for the sheer privilege of being harassed on my own land. Failure to comply within 30 days will result in lien placement and potential foreclosure proceedings, she declared, her voice crackling with the self-important authority of someone who'd never faced a punch in the mouth for speaking such utter nonsense. The mountain air that night reeked of pine needles and pure concentrated entitlement. Eleanor called me immediately after the meeting, her voice trembling with sheer disgust. "Ethan, that woman has completely lost her mind. She's telling people you're a fire hazard because you heat with wood, and that your solar panels could cause electrical fires that would spread to their homes." But Victoria's fabricated fire crisis was merely a prelude to our true escalation. 2 days later, County Building Inspector Miller appeared at my door looking as if he'd rather be investigating serial killers than bothering retired electricians. Behind him stood a man in an impeccably tailored suit who introduced himself as a consulting fire safety engineer, hired by the HOA to evaluate non-conforming residential structures. "Sue," Miller mumbled, avoiding eye contact like a guilty teenager. "We've received professional engineering concerns about potential fire code violations. Mr. Peterson here possesses credentials from the State Fire Marshal's office." Peterson was everything Miller wasn't: self-assured, impeccably dressed, and radiating the condescending arrogance of someone accustomed to bullying working folks with technical jargon. He spent 3 hours photographing my cabin, meticulously measuring clearances between my wood stove and walls, testing my smoke detectors, and generally trying to unearth violations that simply didn't exist. "Your structure meets current codes," Peterson finally conceded, sounding deeply disappointed. "But outdated construction methods undeniably create elevated risk profiles that modern safety standards address through preventive compliance measures." Translation: my cabin was perfectly legal, but didn't conform to his suburban safety fantasies. That evening, Eleanor delivered intelligence that made my coffee taste like liquid fury. Peterson wasn't some impartial fire expert. He was Victoria's cousin, a fire safety consultant from New England, who specialized in fabricating code violations for insurance fraud investigations. The woman had imported her own family to manufacture evidence against me. But Victoria's most desperate maneuver came 3 days later, when County Tax Assessor Sarah Davies knocked on my door, clutching paperwork that reeked of bureaucratic corruption from 50 yards away. "Mr. Vance, I've received a formal request for an emergency property revaluation based on recent improvements and expanded usage that may affect your tax obligation." The request includes photographic evidence of significant structural modifications requiring an updated assessment. The photographic evidence was, of course, Victoria's amateur surveillance operation, grainy pictures of my solar panels workshop edition and vegetable garden, taken from various angles with different cameras. She'd been stalking my property for weeks, building a bogus case that my cabin improvements meant I owed massive back taxes. But here's where Uncle Thomas's meticulous paranoia saved me yet again. I produced his impeccably organized file revealing every permit, every inspection, every tax payment for 40 years of property ownership.
My improvements were in fact restorations of original structures Uncle Thomas had built and properly documented decades ago. "Ma'am," I said, handing Sarah the paper trail that would make an accountant weep with joy. "Every modification on this property was permitted and taxed when originally constructed. My uncle kept records that would impress even the IRS."
Sarah spent an hour reviewing Uncle Thomas's documentation, her expression shifting from bureaucratic authority to genuine admiration. "Mr. Vance, these are the most complete property records I've seen in 20 years of assessment work. Your tax obligations are current and properly calculated." As her county vehicle vanished down my driveway, I noticed Victoria's luxury SUV parked on the county road, likely monitoring the assessment visit through binoculars like some suburban spy who'd watched too many thrillers. That night, my security cameras captured the definitive footage that would forever shatter Victoria's credibility. Camera 3 recorded her teenage son spray painting terrorist across my mailbox while she sat in her idling SUV, headlights off, actually coordinating vandalism against a man she was trying to frame as a dangerous extremist. Camera 1 caught her directing landscaping crews to dump grass clippings on my driveway access, then speeding away when she heard my truck engine start. But the masterpiece was Camera 2's footage of Victoria herself, creeping through my pine trees at midnight, undoubtedly attempting to plant evidence or photograph something she could use against me. The motion-activated camera captured her perfectly. Designer hiking boots, yoga pants, and enough entitlement to power her entire subdivision, brazenly trespassing on property she simultaneously claimed I didn't own. I called Silas Thorne the next morning, my voice steady with controlled fury. "She's crossed every conceivable line now, Silas. Vandalism, trespassing, false reporting, attempted tax fraud, and importing fake experts to manufacture evidence. How much more do we need before we utterly destroy her?" "Almost enough," Silas replied, his voice carrying the chilling satisfaction of a legal predator who could smell blood in the water. "Let her make one more mistake. Your uncle's playbook dictates waiting until she commits the unforgivable sin, the one that turns even her staunchest allies against her." The scent of pine smoke from my evening fire mingled with the intoxicating aroma of approaching justice. Victoria believed she was fighting a harmless recluse who would eventually surrender to her suburban reign of terror. She was about to discover that some mountains do not move, no matter how much money you hurl at them. And Uncle Thomas had taught me that patience is the deadliest weapon in any war truly worth winning. Victoria's final gambit proved she'd utterly lost touch with reality and legal boundaries. Her husband Robert's political connections ran deeper than I'd ever imagined. Within 48 hours of my latest security footage documenting her midnight trespassing escapades, County Commissioner David Miller called an emergency zoning hearing specifically targeting my property. The official notice arrived via certified mail, thick with legal jargon designed to intimidate ordinary folks who didn't speak bureaucratic fluent. Emergency public hearing to address non-conforming residential use creating potential health and safety hazards within established suburban residential district. Translation: Victoria had convinced some corrupt politician to weaponize zoning law against me, but her true masterstroke was the media blitz she launched 3 days before the zoning hearing. Somehow she'd contacted Denver news stations, falsely claiming that a dangerous anti-government extremist was operating an unlicensed compound that threatened family safety in their peaceful mountain community. Channel 7 News actually dispatched a van up the mountain, interviewing Victoria in front of her $12,000 rose garden, where she dramatically pointed at my cabin as if identifying a terrorist training facility. This individual has stockpiled building materials, operates unlicensed solar equipment, and defiantly refuses to comply with basic community standards, she declared, her perfectly highlighted hair floating in the mountain breeze.
Our children cannot play safely knowing there's an unstable hermit with intentions living in our neighborhood. The morning air that day reeked of pine needles and concentrated entitlement. What Victoria didn't know was that Sarah Davies had been meticulously monitoring local news coverage as part of our media strategy. The moment Channel 7 story aired, Sarah contacted the station with irrefutable documentation, proving that the dangerous hermit actually owned the entire subdivision, and that he owned the entire subdivision, and that the concerned homeowner was brazenly violating lease agreements by harassing her on Landlord. Vance, Sarah called me that evening, her voice crackling with journalistic excitement. Channel 7 wants to interview you tomorrow morning. They've realized they were played by a suburban terrorist. You need to know it. They've realized they were played by a suburban terrorist and want to set the record straight. But Victoria's political pressure campaign was simultaneously reaching its crescendo. Sheriff Deputy Jones called me personally to warn that Commissioner Miller was demanding an increased enforcement presence at my property. The political pressure included thinly veiled threats to reduce county funding for the Sheriff's Department if they didn't address the Whispering Pines Road situation through expanded police powers. Mr. Vance Jones explained, his voice tight with frustration. I want you to know that every deputy in this county believes you're being unfairly targeted. But Commissioner Miller is threatening our budget. If we don't make this problem disappear, the stench of corruption mingled with the mountain air like smoke from a chemical fire. Meanwhile, our own preparations had achieved military precision. Silas Thorne had completed lease termination documentation for every hostile resident, including detailed evidence of their harassment campaigns and undeniable breach of contract values agreement. Marcus Brown's surveying work had established GPS coordinates for every square inch of my 847-acre empire, complete with photographic documentation of every encroachment and trespassing incident. But the true breakthrough came when Sarah Davies' investigation revealed the intricate financial connections driving Victoria's political influence. Mountain Vista Estates wasn't merely some random developer. They were a subsidiary of Apex Property Holdings, a national corporation specializing in rural gentrification projects designed to forcibly displace working-class communities in favor of luxurious suburban developments. Commissioner Miller had received a staggering $47,000 in campaign contributions from Apex-affiliated companies over the past three election cycles. This isn't just neighborhood or Sarah explained, corporate financial documents across my kitchen table. This is systematic economic warfare, meticulously designed to drive out original landowners so developers can maximize profits from luxury housing projects. The pattern was terrifyingly clear. Identify rural communities with working-class character, buy political influence through lavish campaign contributions, use zoning enforcement to relentlessly harass original residents until they sell their properties at artificially depressed values. Develop ostentatious luxury subdivisions for wealthy urban refugees desperately seeking authentic mountain lifestyle experiences. Uncle Thomas had recognized this insidious pattern 30 years ago, and had built legal defenses specifically designed to obliterate corporate gentrification schemes. But Victoria's most unforgivable mistake came the night before the zoning hearing. My security cameras captured her directing two men in dark clothing to plant what appeared to be drug paraphernalia near my workshop, undoubtedly hoping sheriff's deputies would discover the evidence during their increased enforcement presence. Camera 1 recorded their license plates. Camera 2 captured crystal clear facial recognition footage. And Camera 3 documented Victoria paying cash to these planted evidence specialists. The woman had escalated from mere harassment to attempted felony frame-up. I called Silas immediately, my voice steady with controlled fury. She just committed multiple felonies trying to plant drugs on my property. How's that for unforgivable sins? Perfect, Silas replied, his voice carrying the chilling satisfaction of a legal predator who'd been patiently awaiting this precise moment. Your uncle's playbook specifically prepared for evidence planting scenarios. Tomorrow's zoning hearing just became Victoria's public execution. The scent of pine smoke from my evening fire mingled with the intoxicating aroma of approaching legal annihilation. Victoria believed she was forcing a final confrontation that would forever drive me from the mountain. She was about to discover that some recluses don't just bite back, they swallow their enemies whole. The HOA annual meeting was still 2 weeks away, But tomorrow's zoning hearing would be the public revelation that utterly demolished her credibility and exposed her suburban terrorism for what it truly was. Corporate truly was. Corporate-sponsored economic warfare against hard-working folks who belonged in these mountains long as luxury subdivisions ever existed. Uncle Thomas's 30-year track was finally primed to spring. The county courthouse was packed beyond capacity that Tuesday morning, standing room only when an overflow crowd gathered outside like spectators at a public execution. Commissioner Miller had scheduled the emergency zoning hearing in the largest available room, probably expecting a swift administrative steamrolling of some troublesome reclusion. Instead, he found himself presiding over a media circus that would erupt into national news before lunch. Channel 7's news crew had secured prime position near the front, their cameras intently focused on Victoria as she took her seat with a briefcase overflowing with manufactured evidence and enough self-righteous indignation to power her entire subdivision. She was dressed for victory, a crisp navy blue power suit, gleaming pearl earrings, and the confident, unshakable smile of someone who'd never lost a battle against working-class resistance. Behind her sat the HOA board and 43 residents. She'd cunningly convinced that I posed some existential threat to their property values and suburban tranquility. The morning air inside the courthouse smelled of nervous sweat and expensive perfume. But Eleanor Jensen had rallied the mountain's original residents, retired teachers, honest mechanics, proud veterans and compassionate nurses, who vividly remembered what this place was like before the luxury SUV invasion. They filled 3 entire rows, their weathered faces etched with the quiet determination of people defending their ancestral homes against corporate colonization. This hearing will address emergency zoning concerns regarding non-conforming residential use. At 12:47, Whispering Pines Row, Commissioner Miller announced, his voice carrying the authoritarian tone of someone accustomed to crushing opposition through bureaucratic intimidation. Victoria approached the podium like a prosecutor, delivering closing arguments in a high-stakes murder trial. Commissioners, this individual operates an unlicensed compound that gravely threatens community safety and flagrantly violates basic residential standards, she declared, her voice projecting across the packed room. We possess documented evidence of building code violations, environmental hazards, and antisocial behavior that endangers families throughout our neighborhood. She clicked through a series of glossy PowerPoint slides, displaying photos of my cabin, solar panels, and vegetable garden, as if they were exhibits from a crime scene. Each photo was accompanied by sensational claims about fire hazards, structural instabilities, and suspicious activities that, she argued, justified immediate zoning enforcement. Property values in Mountain Vista Estates have plummeted 18% since this individual began expanding his illegal operations. Victoria continued, her voice rising with a pharmaceutical sales fervor. Our children cannot play safely, knowing there's an unstable hermit with unknown intentions, operating outside community oversight. The crowd murmured their approval as she painted me as some deranged mountain militia leader, rather than a retired electrician who found peace building birdhouses. Then Silas Thorne calmly requested permission to address significant factual inaccuracies in the petitioner's presentation. Commissioner Miller, trapped, couldn't deny legal representation without creating grounds for an immediate appeal. So Silas approached the podium, carrying a plain banker's box that would change everything. Ladies and gentlemen, Silas announced, his voice slicing through the courthouse chatter like a razor blade through silk. I represent the actual legal owner of the entire Mountain Vista Estate subdivision. A profound, deathly silence descended over the packed room as I slowly rose in the back, every single eye swiveling towards the dangerous hermit who supposedly threatened their suburban paradise. Ethan Vance doesn't live in your community, Silas continued, his words landing like hammer blows against solid steel. You live on his property. Gasps erupted throughout the courthouse as Silas unrolled an old enormous survey maps, clearly displaying my 847-acre ownership encompassing every single house, every meticulously manicured lawn, every precious drop of property value that Victoria so vehemently claimed to protect. Every residence in Mountain Vista Estates sits on land ground leased from Mr. Vance's inherited trust, Silas explained, his voice resonating across the stunned courthouse like thunder rolling through mountain valleys. The developer deliberately never disclosed these lease arrangements to home buyers, constituting systematic real estate fraud. Victoria's face strained, becoming whiter than fresh snow, as the legal bombshell detonated her suburban fantasy. That's impossible, She shrieked, her pharmaceutical composure finally shattering like thin ice. Those documents are fabricated. This is a conspiracy. Sheriff Deputy Jones stepped forward with county property records, calmly confirming every deed, every survey, every legal document that irrevocably transformed Florence Victoria from neighborhood queen to trespassing tenant. But Silas wasn't finished demolishing her credibility. Furthermore, he announced, producing security camera footage on his laptop. Miss Hayes' relentless harassment campaign against Mr. Dance constitutes multiple severe lease violations, including blatant trespassing, malicious vandalism, and last night's attempted felony frame-up involving clean-up evidence. The courthouse erupted in chaos as camera one's footage played on the projection screen. Crystal clear video of Victoria directing two shadowy men to plant drug paraphernalia near my workshop while discreetly paying them cash for their illicit services. You lying bastards. Victoria sure designer facade, utterly collapsing into raw, suburban terrorist reality. I'll sue every single one of you. My husband will destroy you in court. Security personnel swiftly moved to escort the increasingly unhinged HOA president from the premises, while Commissioner Miller desperately tried to restore order to his completely derailed political spectacle. Sarah Davies stood up in the media section, her press credentials gleaming like a beacon of journalistic justice. Commissioner Miller, are you aware that Mountain Vista Estates is a subsidiary of Apex Property Holdings, which has contributed $47,000 to your campaign funds or 3 election cycles? The corruption exposure hit Miller like a sledgehammer to the skull, his face flushing a furious red as local television cameras captured every damning moment of his political destruction.
I finally approached the podium, the entire courthouse holding its breath, waiting to hear from the dangerous hermit who had just revealed himself as their actual landlord. Commissioners, I stated, my voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who owned everything these people believed they controlled. Or, I never sought conflict with my neighbors. I simply wished to live peacefully among them. But when someone attempts to forcibly remove me from land my family has owned for decades, they quickly discover that some mountains simply do not move. The taste of victory mingled with the mountain air, sweet as honey dissolving on my tongue. I am offering rent forgiveness to homeowners who were not complicit in this harassment campaign. I continued, watching 43 suburban faces slowly process the stark reality that their property values now depended entirely on my generosity. However, those who actively participated in this persecution will face immediate lease termination and eviction proceedings. The courthouse buzzed with hushed conversations as residents realized they weren't victims of some dangerous recluse. They were in fact beneficiaries of a magnanimous landlord who possessed the power to utterly destroy them all, but instead chose mercy. Commissioner Miller abruptly declared the hearing closed, likely desperate to escape before reporters could unleash harder questions about his developer kickbacks. Outside the courthouse, Channel 7's cameras captured Victoria's final spectacular meltdown as she shrieked about conspiracies and corruption while security personnel escorted her to the parking lot. The scent of pine needles and pure justice permeated the mountain air as I walked towards my truck, surrounded by neighbors who at last understood who truly belonged in these mountains. Uncle Thomas's 30-year trap had finally sprung, and the sound was profoundly beautiful. The swift destruction of Victoria Hayes unfolded faster than a spring avalanche. Within 48 hours of her courthouse meltdown, criminal charges for false reporting, harassment, trespassing, and attempted evidence planting rendered her utterly toxic to everyone who had ever enabled her suburban terrorism. Her pharmaceutical company fired her via email, eager to sever all ties with criminal conduct incompatible with their corporate values. Her husband Robert filed for divorce within a week, citing irreconcilable differences and the looming threat of criminal liability to his law practice. The $12,000 rose garden she'd illegally planted on my land became damning evidence in her trespassing prosecution. Her luxury SUV, with its blessed vanity plates, vanished from the neighborhood faster than her fake friendships. The house she'd used as her headquarters for harassing her actual landlord was put on the market with a motivated seller sign that screamed desperation louder than her courtroom tantrum. But witnessing our mountain community heal itself was infinitely sweeter than any individual revenge. 68% of homeowners immediately accepted my lease forgiveness offer, profoundly grateful to escape the legal nightmare Victoria's persecution had created. The toxic HOA dissolved like sugar in mountain rain, replaced by the Whispering Pines Neighborhood Association, now dedicated to mutual aid instead of aesthetic fascism. Eleanor Jensen became our beloved president, bringing 4 decades of teaching wisdom to the task of building genuine community among folks who had been cruelly manipulated into suburban warfare. Our very first meeting established a 5-acre community garden where working families could grow actual, nourishing food, not just decorative plants designed to impress no one. The transformation was magical. The artificial stench of synthetic fertilizers gave way to the honest aroma of rich compost and vibrant growing vegetables. Kids who'd been tragically forbidden to play outdoors during Victoria's oppressive reign now ran freely through gardens their grandparents would instantly recognize, bursting with tomatoes, corn, beans, and herbs that served purposes far beyond fleeting Instagram photos. Marcus Brown generously donated surveying services to help every homeowner understand their true property boundaries, proactively eliminating future disputes through education instead of costly litigation. His invaluable work saved 3 families over $15,000 in incorrectly assessed property taxes, real money that meant crucial mortgage payments and medical bills for folks living on fixed incomes. Sarah Davies's groundbreaking investigative series, The Ground Lease Deception, earned her a well-deserved Pulitzer nomination and exposed identical developer fraud schemes across 12 states. Her fearless reporting helped 47 other communities discover they'd been systematically cheated by corporations employing Victoria's ruthless tactics on an industrial scale. But my deepest pride lay in the Thomas Foundation. Using proceeds from lease settlements and legal victories, I established a nonprofit dedicated to providing free legal aid for working families facing predatory corporate land grabs. The foundation's inaugural year protected 18 families from foreclosure, educated 347 homeowners about their fundamental property rights, and provided scholarships for 12 aspiring young legal minds dreaming of fighting corporate bullies. 6 months after Victoria's resounding defeat, we inaugurated Uncle Thomas Day, an annual mountain festival featuring joyous bluegrass music, delicious elk burger barbecue, and practical property law workshops that powerfully demonstrated education's superiority over intimidation. The celebration raised $34,000 for families battling developer harassment, a heartwarming testament to the fact that hardworking people will fiercely defend one another when corporate terrorists fail to divide us through manufactured fear. The conservation easement I placed on 600 acres guarantees these majestic meadows will remain accessible to working families forever, shielded from becoming mere playgrounds for wealthy urban refugees seeking authentic experiences to monetize on social media. Standing on my cabin porch during our monthly neighborhood potluck, watching children joyfully play where Victoria's illegally planted rose garden once stood as a symbol of suburban oppression, I finally grasped Uncle Thomas's profound genius. His paranoia wasn't mental illness at all. It was a prophetic, brilliant preparation for battles against individuals who fundamentally mistake wealth for moral authority. The honest aroma of barbecue smoke mingled with the pine-scented air that now truly belonged to hard-working folks, not pharmaceutical executives. My phone buzzed with a message from the Miller family. Mr. Vance, our children get to grow up in these mountains because you saved our home. Thank you for fighting for all of us. Silas called with news about a Wyoming ranching family facing identical corporate harassment. The Thomas Foundation was expanding across the Mountain West, faithfully using Uncle Thomas's legal blueprint to protect communities from systematic gentrification warfare. Next week, I'm meeting with a cattle rancher who's been battling municipal corruption for 3 years, Silas mentioned. Small-town mayor has been seizing properties through fraudulent tax liens, selling them to his developer buddies for pennies on the dollar. Sound familiar? The insidious pattern was everywhere. Corporate bullies, leveraging government power, stealing land from hard-working people who had built these communities with their own hands. But that, as they say, is a story for another time. The final numbers speak volumes.
847 acres protected from corporate exploitation. 23 families saved from developer fraud. $68,000 in legal fees covered by foundation resources. And one mountain community that learned hardworking people can defeat any bully when they understand the law and stand united. Most importantly, one retired electrician discovered that the best revenge isn't merely getting even. It's securing justice for everyone who cannot fight back alone. Your turn. What's your worst HOA nightmare? Share it in the comments below, because every horror story teaches us how to recognize corporate terrorism before it destroys our precious communities. If this story ignited a spark in you about property rights and legal self-defense, then smash that subscribe button for Karen's stories. We're building an army of ordinary folks who steadfastly refuse to let bullies win through intimidation and manufactured fear. Remember Uncle Thomas's enduring wisdom: own the land, control your destiny, know the law, protect your community. Some mountains don't move, no matter how much money is thrown at them.